You know, I love podcasting. I have since 2006, back when you had to use like a Dixie cup with string to make the thing work. And that's why I'm so excited that we recently moved Mysterious Goings On to Anchor FM to record our podcast. I gotta tell you, I don't regret it a bit. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Not going to lie to you, when I first heard about Anchor, I was a little dubious because I've been doing it the hard way for so long. But I got to tell you, it's very easy. Use a Stripe account. Get sponsors. You're not paying monthly hosting fees. The sound quality is great. The distribution is phenomenal. Friends, download the free Anchor app today if you want to start your own podcast, or go to anchor.fm to get started. Remember, you heard it here first on Mysterious Goings On.
Artificial intelligence. In popular culture, the concept ranges from the USS Enterprise computer in Star Trek to the eponymous Haley Joel Osment character in Spielberg's AI movie, and of course, the deadly HAL in 2001, A Space Odyssey. However, believe it or not, what was once the stuff of fiction can now literally help you write better fiction. Now, stay with me. We're going to find out more about that today as we welcome New York Times, USA Today, and Wall Street Journal best-selling author Alessandra Torre. Alessandra has written 22 novels, so she might know what she's talking about, folks, including 3 New York Times bestsellers. Her first book, Blindfolded Innocence, was a breakout hit, rising to the top of the ebook charts on Amazon, where it attracted the interest of major publishing houses and garnered Torre her first print deal with Harlequin. Less than a year later, she signed a second 6-figure print deal, this time with Red Hook for the Deanna Madden series, an erotic suspense trilogy, which, as you all know, is my favorite kind of trilogy. Torre is also the creator of Alessandra Torre Inc., an authors community and online school with over 10,000 members. She's also the founder of Inkers Con, an annual authors conference. And I love this too. She's a self-publishing advocate. She speaks frequently to universities, conventions, and author groups. Bonus listeners who love this show and listen often know this is my favorite place. She lives in Key West, Florida, where she apparently devotes several hours each day to writing, communicating with her fans and followers and friends on social media. And she says when she's not battling her husband at Scrabble, she chases her pet chickens, 3 dogs, and shoos away iguanas. She's president of Authors A.I, which created Marlowe, the company's fiction-savvy bot to help fine-tune manuscripts for authors everywhere who want to elevate their craft and sell more books. Well, let's open the pod bay doors, Hal, and welcome Alessandra Torre to Mysterious Goings On.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Are you awake now? I mean, I know I kept you a while with that introduction.
Man, it was a long introduction. I'm surprised you still have breath left. And I've heard it all before, so no spoilers. Yeah.
Yeah. Alessandra, I am so excited. First of all, just briefly, though, you made the journey, if I read that correctly, from self-published to New York Times bestseller on your own. Is that correct?
Right. I now have 3 traditional publishers, but every time I've hit the New York Times list 7 times with 3 different books, all self-published books. Wow. So my self-published novels are way more successful than my traditionally published novels, which is one of the reasons why I'm such an advocate for self-publishing. That might change. My next 2 books are with Thomas and Mercer, which is an Amazon imprint. So I'll be very curious to see how those do and see what the power of Amazon does for those.
Just really quickly before we get into AI, but is there a reason why you think the self-published books do better than the more traditional route?
Absolutely. There's like 6 reasons why. One is price point. My traditional published ebooks, in my opinion, traditional publishers are trying to justify and keep their print sales alive. And one of the ways they do that is by predatorily pricing their ebooks. So my ebooks were priced at $9.99 or $12.99, where the print versions of those books were like $7.99, $8.99. So it really cannibalized and for my readers who were used to reading me at $3.99 or $4.99, I mean, they were just aghast at the idea of spending $10 in ebook. So price point is definitely one thing. The other thing is just as a self-published author, I can pivot my marketing and my publishing strategy so much quicker. And I don't write to market. I'd probably be more successful if I did, but especially in romance, which the bulk of my books are romance. I also write suspense novels, but in romance especially, it's very fad driven. So vampire romances might be all of the rage, and indie authors can whip out vampire romances and publish, in 3 to 6 months, a new vampire romances. Traditional publishing schedules, I mean, they're a year and a half out. So by the time they try to hit that trend, it's gone, or if the cover isn't working, if the ending isn't working, if the reviews stink, I can immediately fix all of those things. I could change the title. I can jump in on a promo with other authors with little to no advance notice, and I can't, or change the blurb. I can change the book's description. And that was one of my, in fact, my first book, which is a breakout book, and I don't mean to go off on a tangent. This is a quick, very interesting story. I published my first novel, and I was selling, this is back in 2012, I was selling 3 to 5 copies a day for the first 2 months. And the most I ever got up to is like 30 copies a day. And that was just like some freak of nature day. And then I was like sitting at home looking at it, and I was like, I think I'll write a different book description. So I spent 10 minutes and I wrote a different book description, uploaded it to Amazon and hit refresh, and I went to bed. And the next day I had 100 sales. And then the next day I had 300 sales. And then within 4 days, I was selling 2,000 copies a day. And literally the only thing I changed was that book description. That was it. The only thing I changed. But what it made me realize is how many people were clicking on that book, like clicking on the cover, because it was a very clickable cover, clicking on the cover, reading the description and being like, this isn't really for me. And then they would move on to something else. Where the minute I just had to find that magic ingredient. And if it was not for me, just that 10 minutes I spent that one day, I'm not sure I would have this career that I have now, because that book skyrocketed and then got me a 6-figure advance and gave me confidence and gave me a pot of money that I could use to further my career. And then that really birthed my entire career.
Okay, you're blowing me away here on several levels, but one of them is I never once considered this, and I had good sales. I've never been a top seller like you, obviously, but I never dreamt of cracking open that book again, because it took me so much effort to write it. Cracking it open to change it in any way, you know what I mean? Even the title. Now the blurb I've thought about, but just actually changing the title of a book or changing, maybe I'm a little too precious with my books then.
A great example of this, I recently, InkersCon, which is our annual conference, which is online and in person, quick plug for InkersCon. I interviewed, or one of our panelists there was Jeff Carson, who writes suspense. His first book, he ended in a certain way, and readers just didn't like the ending. And the reviews said that. And he actually went and he completely rewrote the ending to a different ending and published it. And then that book really, it's the first book in his series. So he then went on and, has, calculated on that, or capitalized on that book for the last 4 years, to lead to the rest of the series. So that's the biggest drastic example I've seen of that. But it was the right thing to do. And he's like, I just pushed my ego and my thoughts aside and listened to the reviews. And you could have never done that with a traditionally published book. Once that book is locked and loaded, you're done. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sacrosanct at that point. Change my book. How dare you? No,
yeah.
Well, that's fascinating, because you know what? I don't know if I could break myself of that on this series, but if I ever start again and I want to just do something a little more down and dirty on the fly, I think I'm going to leave myself open to that kind of thing and just do a market test and try those things. But I think one thing I'm going to do, now that I have your advice here, I'm going to go back and I'm going to re-blurb everything. I reskinned all of the books about 2 years ago with different covers, which really brought the series back up, gave it some life. But I think I probably didn't, and I fine-tuned the blurbs, but maybe I should go ahead and change the online blurb again, see what happens.
To me, the best thing about it is you instantly know. And I'll do it a lot of times. If I, like my worst selling books, I'll change the blurb and then I'll just watch sales rank and sales for a week and then see. Or I'll do a week of kind of pushing traffic to it with the existing blurb, and then I'll change it. And then you can immediately know, I mean, either the sales stay the same, they drop, or they increase. And that's the easiest and most inexpensive change that you can make,
When you say immediately, would you say give it like a week, or are you saying like a day?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there have been times, one of my books, I push 200 or 300 clicks a day to that page. If I change the blurb on that and within a day or two, if I don't see a change, then I've changed it back. Or if I've seen a drop in sales, then I've changed it back. But that's also a book it's in KU, but almost all of its sales are actual ebook sales, so I can tell. If it's in KU, I'd give it a week because those page reads takes time.
Okay, great. Well, hey, everybody, authors out there, you've got your best tip of the day right here early in the show, but don't go anywhere because we're going to talk about artificial intelligence. Okay, Alessandra, when I first saw this come across the desk from your publicist, they're talking about how and I didn't know really anything about Marlowe, and I thought, and I got to be honest, my first thought was I was a little cynical about it. I thought, I don't know, what? I don't know. So before I get into my blabbing about it, why don't you tell everybody what Marlowe is, what this whole concept means to writers?
Sure. So if you're a writer who's familiar with the bestseller code, the bestseller code is a book that was published 2 or 3 years ago and really made waves in publishing when it did. But it was about a technology that could predict whether a book was going to be a bestseller. And with like 86% accuracy, the scientists would feed a manuscript into the book without telling that technology anything about the author or the book. They would just feed a manuscript in. And the technology would read the manuscript and then say, there's a 99.2% chance this book is going to be a bestseller, or it would say there is a 15% chance this book is going to be a bestseller. And what they considered a bestseller was that it had been on the New York Times list for 10 weeks, at least 10 weeks. So a significant bestseller. And 86% of the time it was right. Based on not knowing anything else. So that was really powerful in the industry. And the gentleman, the co-author of that book, Dr. Matt Jockers, is one of our founders. Marlowe is built on, similar technology that is now much more current. But the gist of it is that Marlowe is our technology. Marlowe has read thousands of books, and she remembers everything about every book that she's ever read. So where a book editor might read 100 books a year, she could read 100 books at lunch. And what she does is we have identified to her which books are good books, which books are best-selling novels or have extremely high reviews, multiple, like hundreds of reviews that are extremely high. And then we've indicated which books are poor sellers or low-ranked books. And then she finds patterns and commonalities in them. So what's really cool is she can, you've, I'm sure, seen Grammarly, right? There's sentence stats, there's structure, there's things like that. But there's also that's one thing that's like a data thing. What's really cool about Marlowe is she can actually plot the emotional high points and low points, moments of conflict, when your reader is going to be moving through your book quicker versus slower, when they might be getting bored, when you might be lacking action. And she can actually plot so when you see a normal, I forget, you can't see me, but when you see a normal plot arc, drawn on paper, she can actually plot out your book not on paper, but on your computer screen, and really show where those action beats are happening in your novel and things like that. So in addition to that, she just does, not 100 other things, but she does 20 or 30 other things, like find cliches that you might have used in your wording, find repetitive phrases, like an authorial tic you might use, like some people use by the way a lot, or some other turn of phrase. So she finds that. Adverbs you might be overusing, passive, things like that. So she does just a ton of cool stuff, and any author can submit their manuscript, and within 15 minutes, they get back her full report. So it's a great, just inexpensive way that somebody, especially a first-time author, if you're like me, I was terrified to give that manuscript to anybody. Like, and then the people you do give it to are like your mom, who doesn't read this sort of thing at all. And she's either going to tell you it's the greatest thing she's ever read, and she probably didn't get past the first page, first 10 pages, or she's going to pick it apart and it's almost useless information because she doesn't read that genre. She's not your target audience. So, and editors, as you know, can be very expensive. So it's a really great, I use it as an author. I still publish 2 to 3 books a year. I use her on every draft that I run. So every time I have a new draft, I run a report, and I look mainly at the pacing and plot structure. And then I've also used her on my worst selling and my best selling books to see if I can see how, I ran through my very first book with her and then my 23rd book with her, so that I could see how I've changed and improved as a writer.
So many things there you covered. It's funny, I have a fellow writer in Canada who was he's reading my first book in my series, and he's read the others later, but he didn't read the first one. He read them out of sequence, and he says, wow, I can really see the difference in your writing from the first to the last. He said, how old were you when you wrote this first one? And I was like 12 years ago. And he says, yeah. And he says, the character seems 12 years younger too. I'm like, oh, how interesting. But the other thing too is the authorial tics you talk about. Like, oh my gosh, my first book, my characters should probably go to the optometrist for all the times they rolled their eyes.
Yep.
Oh,
nodded their head a lot, right?
And,
yeah.
Oh, yeah. And with a pensive, but stroked his chin pensively. So Marlowe would identify that and say, hey, Alex, dude, you might want to find something else here. But I like that. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, I had not thought about this too, is just, maybe going back and running those older books through there and seeing if there's some tweaks that can be made. Man, you had that onto the blurb advice you gave earlier. You better look out.
I'm done, right? Yeah.
It's all over. I'm going to knock you off the best.
I'm going to chase my chickens. Yeah.
I got to go chase my chickens. No, but Marlowe's got a great pedigree, like you said. This is not just some kind of fly-by-night operation. The folks behind this, you're all very accomplished in the literary realm. Forgive me if you touched on it, but was there just a moment? I mean, I know you're talking about the book you referenced earlier, but was there a moment when you went, aha? But if we made it an online thing where people could upload their manuscripts, was there just like an aha moment, or was it just something that everybody kind of sat around the table and said, this is what we got to do. We got to take the ideas of this book and put it online right away.
Dr. Matt Jockers, our co-founder, he was teaching at Stanford and he's been studying AI and fiction for a decade. I mean, for ages, and probably longer than a decade, but at least a decade. And he was teaching at Stanford, and he was talking about commonalities in fiction and things like that, and using a computer to read a novel. And, at Stanford, the running joke is if you graduate, you're a failure, because they want, all the successful people drop out and start companies, right? So somebody in the back row raises their hand, and goes, have you thought about the commercial applications of this? And he was like, no, it hadn't even occurred to him, right? He's a researcher, that's what he does. And so but he then started thinking about the commercial applications of it. And so there's a lot of different places this AI can go, and we're thinking about it from the author side. That was kind of the initial, but really where it's going to be really awesome and really powerful in I say a couple years, it's not a couple years, it's more like a couple months, is using this in terms of feeding book recommendations. So when I say that Marlowe can read a book and know everything about it, can you imagine a librarian who's read millions of books? And when you say, I want a book like the Da Vinci Code, and she can say, okay, do you mean in subject matter? Do you mean in pacing? Do you mean in the writing style of that author? Do you mean in action levels? Or do you just want a book as much like the Da Vinci Code as possible? And then, that librarian can look in her, database of 1 million books and say, this book is 92% like the Da Vinci Code. I mean, there is not another book recommendation outlet, like that anywhere. So that's where we're we're very close to being, I mean, we have the technology, so it just hasn't been released yet. So that's when it's really going to become powerful. So there's two benefits to Authors AI for authors. One is helping them improve their novels, but in the very near future, they will also be able to submit their novels to Marlowe for recommendations as well.
That was my question, because you said, Marlowe can read 100 books over a lunch hour, but is the database going to be limited to people who've actually used the service, or is Marlowe going to read things that are in the public domain, or if you just to build that database, how's that going to work?
So Marlowe right now has a database of books we've purchased. So the way that copyright law works is we can feed any book into Marlowe. We have to purchase it, scan it in, purchase it in print, scan it in, and then turn it into text and then feed it to her. Or an author can upload the manuscript into Marlowe and decide whether or not. So if you want to run your manuscript through Marlowe, at the point in which you submit it to Marlowe, you then decide, there's a checkbox. I want Marlowe to add this to her corpus and learn from it, or I don't want her to add this to her corpus and learn from it. So that is one way Marlowe gets books, is people who add it to the authors who add it to the corpus. Another way is us literally purchasing books and submitting them to her.
So in that case, let's say I'm using Marlowe just to check out my first draft, I would probably not want to tick the box that has Marlowe keep that, because it's my first draft. However, if I want to run finished drafts through it just to see what's going on, that's probably a better way. I'm thinking from a marketing standpoint, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, our book recommendation engine isn't active or available to the public yet. So the public being authors either. So nothing that is submitted now to Marlowe, it would be used for book recommendations. It would just be used to help her. The more that she reads, the more she understands. And one of the most important things that is part of that submittal is choosing what genre it is, because where she is right now in her growth is she's really absorbing as many genres as possible. So because a mystery plot arc is an ideal mystery plot arc is going to look different than an ideal romance plot arc, right? So so she needs to read as many books in different genres as she can. We're giving her books every day. That's really, when you're checking that box, it's really just helping her grow. It's not actually helping you with your marketing now. A couple months from now, that would change.
And that's what I was getting at, is just down the road. I'm thinking, I think I'd probably want my finished books to be part of that database. So definitely. Yeah.
Down the road, if I had to guess, it's going to be a completely separate portal. It's like, if you want to submit your books to Marlowe's recommendation engine, you would do it here. If I had to guess, my tech team would absolutely kill me, because I don't know that. We don't know that answer yet. We aren't there yet. But yeah.
Marlowe can identify story beats too, which is kind of crucial to telling it, especially a good thriller, right? You want your peaks and valleys, right? So can Marlowe identify maybe when I'm way too low in a valley for too long and say, yo, you need to up the action here? Is that
100%? 100%. Yeah. That's where she really shines.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is I mentioned earlier about being too precious about our books. We're in a genre here. We're here to entertain. I am not writing Inherit the Wind here. So I need to probably, as you said earlier, in a nicer way about ego. I need to get over myself though and think about that. I'm really just. Can you tell you've really got my wheels turning?
That's good.
Yeah.
I'm glad.
I am glad too. Now let me ask you a little bit about how it works. Is it a subscription plan, or can you just do it one at a time? How does that work?
You can do either. So you can just purchase a one-off report. It is not the most economical way of doing it, but people do it all the time. They don't like month-to-month plans, I guess. But you can purchase a single report for $89. The much better way to do it is our $29.95 a month plan, which gives you 2 reports per month. And it's not a contract, it's month to month. You can stop it at any time. So that's really, that puts it down to less than, $12, $13 a report. And actually, if you get the annual plan, it's like $8 a report, because the annual plan is $199 a month, and that includes 24 reports a year whenever you want to run them. But we also have a free plan, which allows a more basic version of the AI report, but it gives you an idea of how the process works, what the report looks like. You don't get all the really cool features like the plot arcs, but it's well worth doing. I mean, it's things you won't get in Grammarly or somewhere else like that. So the free report, pro members can run unlimited basic reports, and free members can run unlimited basic reports as well.
Yeah, and I imagine my accountant won't look askance if I got the pro, because it's part of what I do. So
yeah.
I like that idea.
Oh, absolutely.
So let's say we upload something there. How long does it take? I imagine it takes a year or two to get this report.
Exactly. Yeah. By the time you're 4 books down, it takes 15 minutes or less, unless the system is, unless we're just flooded with business. If we're flooded with business, then you'll go in a queue, and it might take, I don't know. I've never had to wait more than 20 minutes for a report. Unless you have an upload issue, and that normally is caused by, we have a bunch of preparation instructions to help you. She doesn't front and back matter should be removed, because otherwise she'll look at that as part of the book. So front and back matter is supposed to be removed. Headers and footers are supposed to be removed. Any track changes or comments should be removed, because that confuses her. A lot of people check all those boxes and say they've done it, but they haven't. So if you do submit a full-blown with complicated text file, it might take longer, because she might not be able to process it.
I'm thinking of my editor's face. Robert is probably cringing right now, because he's like, that notorious cheapskate Alex is going to put it all in Marlowe, and I won't hear from him ever again. Does my editor become more of a copy editor rather than a story editor?
No, not at all. Marlowe is a great alternative to someone who might not be able to afford a developmental editor or a content editor, but nothing in our opinion as a business is that nothing can replace a human editor. So she's a great thing to use alongside an editor. She's a great way, maybe to help you self-edit and get your manuscript as clean and as great as possible before you send it. So you have a little bit less back and forth, and maybe you can skip one round of that developmental editor. Yeah, and save some money and time. Human editors take time. They can't take 15 minutes. But we have a lot of editors who are actually purchasing and are working with us to purchase industry passes, because they want to add it onto their services. So when they send developmental or a content letter to their clients, they include a Marlowe report. So that's actually we've had more interest. Editors go one of two ways. They're either freaked out by us and alarmed, or they want to use us as much as they can. So those are the two. And I tried to convince all of them our goal is not to put editors out of business. And another concern from not so much editors, but often authors and readers is, well, if Marlowe is telling everyone how to, hit this gold standard, right? Like it's saying, oh, you should, are we going to have a bunch of carbon copy books? Where Marlowe can tell you that your book is sluggish in the beginning, or your pacing is way too fast in the middle and at the end, or that you're using, quickly. For me, I use quietly. My characters do everything quietly, apparently, quietly way too much. She's not giving you plot ideas or specific, where a human editor could be like, it's slow in the beginning. Let's move this scene or delete this scene altogether. Marlowe, you really kind of have to figure that part out for yourself, where a human editor might be able to offer ideas, creative ideas. Marlowe is pointing out the issues, and then every author figures out a solution to that. So there's not going to be cookie cutter books. Might there be books that have, and also once we are able to do genre specific recommendations, then especially, might there be books that are suddenly better paced? Yes. But the storylines are going to be, as you know, we could all be given the exact same outline, and we're going to come up with completely different things. The other thing that she does, which I didn't even mention, is her characters. So she'll do a breakdown of your characters and their personality traits. So that's always really interesting to me, because in my early books, my characters were very similar, right? I think they were all like me, right? Like your friends, oh, your character was 12 years more immature. my female characters were almost like, even though they were in the same book, very similar in nature. And maybe your villain is too agreeable and pleasant or something like that. So that's always an interesting thing for me to see. It's not perfect. It's still learning. And she struggles if your book is dual POV, dual first person POV. Her character section isn't going to be helpful to you because she can't tell the difference between character 1 speaking in the I and character 2 speaking in the I. So that she struggles with. And I don't think there's ever going to be a solution to that because she's not going to be able to distinguish one person's first person from another. She's going to just read them as a very inconsistent character.
Yeah, why should she be any different than most of my readers? I think that I am fascinated by the character too. And this is probably not what she can do for me, but I'll just throw it out there. I don't care. Do you think there's ways, even around the edges, she can help me write better female characters as opposed to you saying how like a lot of your female characters seem the same? Do you think Marlowe would read my book and go, Alex, not like Marlowe's going to say, hey, buddy, let's have a cup of coffee.
Not yet. She's getting there. Yeah.
All right, good. Here, have a shooter. We're going to talk. No, but I mean, do you think she could report and say, basically, I can't tell your females from your males? Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah. I'm not that bad, but I'm wondering.
No. Yeah. I'm trying to think. I haven't examined the report close enough, but when looking through our support issues, someone emailed me and said that it identified her female characters as male. And and they were alarmed by that, for the same reason, and I think it was just that they had more masculine tendencies. I think if your female characters, yes, she can, when you are looking at your character breakdowns, if there is an issue with your female, it would be apparent in that issue, in that instance. As far as using feminine language versus masculine language and things like that, I don't think she can help with that yet. That being said, every time I bring up something to Matt and to the tech team, it's always sure, soon, like we can do that, but not yet. So because we have these 5 other things that you have put in front of us that we have to tackle first. But it's really cool, like what patterns, the bestseller code is fascinating read if you have a chance to read it. But you can tell an author whether they're from the United States or from Australia or from Great Britain just based on how many times they use the word "the" in a book. So I thought, I bet, personal quiz to myself, I bet I know the answer to this, and I was wrong. Americans use the word "the" more frequently than British or Australian, and that's because a lot of times when they use sentences, they say something like, I'm going to university instead of to the university. So there's a lot of things like that are also present in male and female dictation and narration and things like that. And whether a author or authorial tics oftentimes can indicate whether a computer can tell the difference if it's a female or a male writing the book. Typically, that's a giant assumption about about genders, but there are certainly cues that can indicate to a computer whether the author is male or female. It's like we have this giant sea of information which we can learn about a book, but what isn't, just a small portion of that is included in the report for now.
Okay, I know I don't have you much longer because you're in Key West, and why would you want to talk to me much longer when you're in Key West? Okay, but let me just shift gears really quickly, Alessandra, if I could, and we'll finish up and make sure everybody knows how to find out more, and there'll be links in the show notes. I promise you, my listeners, always links in the show notes.
We interrupt this interview for me to tell you that if you're as excited about Marlowe as I am and you want to give it a shot, well, you're in luck. Alessandra has offered MGO Pod listeners mysterious goings-on people. I guess you're mysterious goners? Ooh, that's a new nickname. I'll have to explore that. Maybe I'll run it through Marlowe. If you're interested in getting Marlowe, go to Authors.ai and get this. Plug in the coupon code MGO15 and you'll save 15% on a single report. or on their plans. Again, that's Authors.ai. The coupon code is MGO15. It's all in the show notes, but I had to break in here just to let you know that so you be sure you don't miss out on this great deal.
Where do you see the business going? We all know the gold rush 10, 15 years, well, not even 15, about 10 years ago, right? Everybody and their dog was putting out a book on Kindle or on ebook of some form. And two things happened. You had some people who were very talented like yourself who found their way to the top. You had some people who really had no business writing books, putting out books. Yeah. So you kind of had this weird situation where this weird separation, in my opinion, where you had a lot of the cream rose to the top, obviously, but then you had a lot of, in my opinion, you had a lot of folks who, for whatever reason, the books weren't so good, and they kind of dragged down us mid-listers a little bit. So I'm curious as to your thoughts of where the business is now for writers and where you think it's going.
You're just talking about the industry in general, right? Self-publishing and fiction.
Self-publishing.
Yeah. It's a really great question. And what you just described is very accurate. In 2012 through 14, anyone really could make money writing and publishing books. Didn't have to be good books, and what it caused was a giant saturation in the market and an influx of poorly written, poorly formatted, poorly marketed novels. And I'll be there. I'm not judging anyone. I'll be there to write. I was right there. My first book, which was such a huge hit. I wrote it. I read it twice. I was like, looks good. I caught like 9 typos, which I thought was just amazing. I patted myself on the back for 5 minutes and I hit publish. It didn't see an editor. It didn't see anybody. I mean, I ran spell check. It was to this day, I cannot read that book. That book ended up being purchased by Harlequin. We went through a extremely fast editorial process because it was just such a huge success and they wanted to get it out as soon as possible in print. But I can't read that book because the writing is so amateurish to me. And I had never had formal training in writing. I just had a natural talent, which was in part bred because I had read just my entire life all the time. I was that kid, as I'm sure many of your listeners are, who just read like a fiend. And that's one of the best training. That if you're listening to this and you're interested in writing a book, you've thought about it, if you are a voracious reader, that is such great training because you need to read high quality stuff. You don't want to read a bunch of crap. Read high quality stuff, figure out what you like in a book. And then the second part of that is then writing and writing and writing. And you will get better with every single scene you write and every single book you write. My 23rd book is 100 times better than my first book. And you just have to understand that your first draft is going to be really rough and ugly. And that's normal. My first drafts to this day are rough and gross, and that's how they are. That was not the question you asked, Alex, at all. But I went on a tangent.
Alessandra, I have to just chime in. Listeners know this story real quick, though. It's like my first one, even with an editor, a local book club bought it. And I went, and these ladies were drinking wine and talking about the book. And then one lady just tore into me like, why did I spend $15 on a book with 4 typos? And then you made a mistake. Saint Francis was not the patron saint of this and blah. And I'm just cringing. And so then I go home and I just feel horrible. Like I somehow lied to them and sold them a bill of goods and they were miserable with the book and all that. Because then they were like, yeah, it's a sorry book. Thanks so much. And then they wanted to drink their wine and I just slunk out of there. But then I went home and I went immediately and I found a better professional editor because I think obviously the one I had let me down. But to this day, even after rewriting that book 5 times, I'm with you. I just cringe at parts of it. And what sucks for me is it's the first book in my series. And I'm wondering if, even though it's been rewritten and fixed and I've had a better editor, I'm just still thinking, geez, maybe I could tinker with it one more time. But you know what? You're not my psychiatrist. You don't want to tell me anything.
I completely forgot when we talked earlier about changing books after they're published. I don't know why. I don't know if I've just blocked this part of my life out, but having this conversation reminded me of it. So I had my first breakout hit, and then it was like 5 or 6 more books before I had another big hit. And that was the hit where I hit the New York Times list. I couldn't hit the New York Times list on my first book because it was in KU. Well, they didn't have KU back then, but it was exclusive to Amazon. But in those books before I had my next hit, I had 2 books that were just weak books. It was one of those things, every time someone would be like, hey, I picked up Dumont Diaries, I would just be like, oh, like, I'd go, great. But inside I was just thinking, like, why did you pick up that book? Like, you're going to judge me on that book. It's a horrible book. Don't buy that book. And then I really was like, why am I selling a book that I'm not happy with, you know? So I took that book off the shelf, and I had some downtime when I was waiting on an editor to give me my book back. And I just spent 3 weeks and I completely rewrote that book. And I killed the original copy altogether. I retitled it. I gave it a new name. I added a second character's point of view. I gave it a new title and a new cover, and I released it as a brand new book. And I now feel like I can look at my backlist and I can be proud of all of it, with the exception of my first book, which is traditionally published, and I can't ever change a word of it again. But one day I will buy that book back from the publisher. I just need to win the lottery, but I will one day buy that book back from the publisher and I will rewrite it. But that was one of the best spent 3 weeks in terms of just not, because you never know how people are going to find you. And especially if it's the first book in the series, and it might be the best it can be. Like, you might have rewritten it. I'm not saying you should do that with your book 1, but that was something, again, that you can do with self-publishing that you can't do with others, because I've just grown so much. And I was reading, I was like, oh my gosh, like, in my book, I have my main character, my hero, which in romance is supposed to be this like gleaming, you know, perfect individual, and he drugs the main character and, like, you know, like, takes her away. And I was like, I can't, like, what was I thinking? Like, why was that? But back in 2013, 50 Shades of Grey time, you know, men were doing all sorts of things in romance novels. But, you know, in the current era, when I was rewriting this, which was like 2018, it was just like, this cannot happen. And it was just, you forget about things you've written in books.
Thank you for that, by the way, because, you know, I think you just hit it on the head. I've gone back to the well on that book so many times. I need to leave it alone. It's what it is. But I'm not going to give up on writing a better blurb. And I wish Marlowe could write blurbs, because I hate writing blurbs. But
it's horrible, yeah.
One last thing about the trends right now. I've recently interviewed 2 authors. One of them just hit #1 on Amazon in Canada. Douglas Skelton from Scotland. His book, Thunder Bay, just hit #1 literally this week as we're talking. That is a series with a female protagonist. And then about 2 weeks after him, I interviewed Burt Weisbord, who used to be a film producer, by the way. He made Ghost Story and The Raggedy Man, a few other things, and he turned into an author. And his new series is a female protagonist. You talk about the way things are these days. I'm wondering if you're going to see, is that a trend, or is that the way it's going to be, do you think, from here on out, seeing a lot more females in the genre of the thriller genre?
Yeah, I think first of all, I do want to finish talking about industry trends. And that is one, like, let's definitely walk down this path. And this was something I recently talked about with Matt, looking at AI, because I said, what is all your research and looking at bestsellers tell you about what makes a great book in terms of characters? And he said, the main thing is that the main character is very defined in what they need. And literally books that have the word need in them are more popular than books that, you know, they don't want something. They don't want whatever this goal is. They need it. Like, it is a fundamental, you know, there's very clearly defined main characters that are aggressively going after something, whether it's love, whether it's the bad guy or whatever. And mysteries are a little different because they're much more plot based in my mind. They're much more plot than character driven, but yeah, great characters can save horrible plots. Great plots cannot always save horrible characters. I don't know. It's such an odd time with everything, you know, and I think you're going to see more main characters of color and just with the industry. And I do think with the big push for female empowerment a couple years ago, which is now, it takes some time, you know, I do think you're seeing more women in leading roles, strong heroines. Strong heroines have always been popular in romance, but strong heroines in leading roles in suspense. When you just look at Gone Girl, Girl on the Train, The Silent Patient, I mean, so many of the big books of the last 2 or 3 years had main female protagonist or or villains. So has definitely been a trend. And circling back to like our market being saturated or, not the other thing that has happened is authors have become such great marketers that it's become really difficult for readers to figure out whether a book is good. It used to be, you'd be like, oh, this is a homemade cover, with some horrible font and a messy blurb. This is a book I should stay away from. But now you have self-published authors that are coming in with slick, polished covers, professionally written, oftentimes blurbs, and then they're putting $20,000 or $30,000 of ad money behind these books. And you have these books that are in the top 100 or they're in the top 50, and they're not even that great books. They're just, and a lot of times they're ghost written books, which is the really scary part, is you have authors that are just churning out 20 books a year that, you don't know who's writing those books. And that really scares me more than anything about this industry is we want readers to find great books. And for every book that a reader purchases that looks great and isn't, diminishes their trust in us and their trust in the industry and in books. And it gets to the point where people are like, oh, I used to like to read, but I don't really like reading anymore. Well, the problem is you're reading crappy books. Okay. But they don't know that. They just think like, oh, I'm just, I used to like to read and now, I'd rather watch this really amazing TV miniseries, we're competing against some really great TV right now. And that scares me because so many things can be artificially affected with ads that it makes it hard for a reader in this day and age.
Yeah, well, I think you nailed that too. The competition, it's like, especially because it's television now has become the medium of choice for writers rather than movies. And of course, now we're all locked up at home, so television is there. Last night, I am savoring every moment of the Perry Mason reboot that HBO's doing. I'm just savoring every moment because it's so well done. And I'm saying, and of course, every writer probably thinks like, I can never write that. But we will try.
Game of Thrones, the entire 8 seasons was ruined for me because after every episode, my husband would be like, I don't understand. Why can't you just write something like this? like, I know. You right now, like, go away. Yeah.
I totally know. All right. I know we got to go here, but I would be remiss if I didn't ask you what's next for your writing. Is there something new coming out soon?
Yeah. So this December-ish, my book with Thomas and Mercer comes out. It's called Every Last Secret. It's a domestic suspense, which I'm absolutely in love with. And I'm so excited about 2 neighboring couples and kind of the toxic friendship that forms between them. So I'm really excited for that. And then I've got another book in the can. I just submitted to Thomas and Mercer. So it's going through rewrites now, but it'll be out next summer. But that's for me on the writing agenda. And I don't think I've mentioned our website a single time. Because I'm
now's your chance.
Horrific guest, but it's Authors.ai is our website URL.
That's just going to be my next question. And from there, I'm sure there's links to you. But what if they just want to know more about your books? Is there an author page for you they should go to?
So if you're interested in my novels or in my online courses or conference for authors, my website is alessandratorre.com. I picked the absolute worst pen name because it could be spelled 4 different ways. But it's ALESS, alessandratorre.com. And that is all my books. And then alessandratorreinc.com, INK, not INC, is my website for authors, aspiring authors or published authors, anywhere from newbies to experienced.
Well, and all those links will be in the show notes. Last question. This is my only concern here, Alessandra. I'm a little concerned for you and your team about this. What if people start writing books that make artificial intelligence the villain? Will Marlowe take offense? And then are we all doomed?
You're not doomed. She won't wreak havoc. She has little to no ego. So I think she would actually love that book. And it depends on how well it's written. I guess that's the good answer. So she'll either give it a thumbs up or thumbs down based on how well it's written.
Alessandra Torre, you have been just a delight and a treasure trove of information about the industry, and I am very intrigued by Marlowe and what you're doing there. And listeners, I hope you will go check this out. I'm going to tell you straight up, I think I'm going to definitely give it a shot. I at least want to run a draft or two through Marlowe and see what's what with that. So, Alessandra, thank you for being here on Mysterious Goings On.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Alex. I appreciate it.
You bet. And don't forget, go to mgopod.com, where you can find complete show notes for this episode, as well as the complete archive of things that we have done in this show for the past 4 years, not the least of which are my ramblings that I call monologues. You want to check those out when you can't sleep. Other than that, though, we have some great interviews with authors and people in the business and musicians and all sorts of creative types. You're going to love it. So check it out, mgopod.com. And of course, as always, until next time, keep reading.
Get a credit card that gives you what you need now. A low interest rate on everyday purchases, and a place to transfer high interest rate balances. The PenFed Gold Contactless Card is our lowest interest rate credit card. You can even earn a $100 statement credit when you spend $1,500 in the first 90 days. Join PenFed, and together we can help you keep more of what's yours. Visit penfed.org/goldcard. To receive any advertised product, you must become a member of PenFed, insured by NCUA. A little flexibility can go a long way. By refinancing your new or used auto loan with PenFed, you can lower your monthly payments for more flexibility in your budget. You can even schedule your first payment for up to 60 days from the date of your refinance. Calculate how much you could save at penfed.org/auto-refi or call 1-800-247-5626 to apply. Membership is open to everyone. To receive any advertised product, you must become a member of PenFed, insured by NCUA.